Going into today's games, we'll start with the key game of the round between Tan Zhongyi and Alexandra Kosteniuk. Of course, Kosteniuk was a full point behind going into this game, so if she wanted to tie for first, she would have to win this one on demand as black. She played the Slav defense, which allowed Tan to play the exchange Slav, a very drawish opening at higher levels. And there honestly wasn't much of a fight in this game. Seems like both players were very satisfied with a draw here, as the bishops come off rather quickly. Both sides castle, the rooks come to the c-file, and yeah, very fast the players actually found the repetition here. After rook fc1, knight to b3 was played. White moved the rook, knight a5 back, and the players did in fact repeat moves, and a draw was agreed. This would allow Tan Zhongyi to clinch first place. The drama definitely wasn't over, as multiple players would now be in contention for second place. One of them was Harika Dronavali, who would need to win this game as black against Elizabeth Pates. And this one was definitely a big fight, starting off as a Catalan opening with c4, castles, queen c2, and now early c5 from black. So dc5, queen a5 check, knight c3, d takes c4. Harika definitely well prepared in this opening. But here white does get a bit of an edge. In fact, Pates is the one that keeps the time advantage out of the opening here, indicating that she was the better prepared player. So knight e4 takes, knight c6, bishop to e3. White is a pawn down here, but will eventually win this pawn back on c4, and then could possibly stand better. At this point, the Engines like the move knight to d4 here for white, where after the exchange of knights, bishop takes d4. Black's gonna have a hard time developing the queen side because of the b7 pawn, and it seems like white might have a bit of a plus here. Instead, we saw rook fc1, which is logical, but now after e5, a4, queen a6, white wins back the c4 pawn, but black is able to develop the light-squared bishop, and here black does actually start to stand quite comfortably. So bishop to c5, Danjin actually doesn't like this move because of takes, and rook fd8, where black maybe already has a bit of an advantage here with well-placed pieces and a nice strong pawn center. But instead we saw rook f7, trades on e7, and anyways actually Harika does get the initiative here. After rook to d8, knight d3, knight b3, very strong move, getting the knight into white's position. And here after rook to e1, maybe rook to d4 would have been black's best chance to pose some significant problems. Simply going after the a-pawn, it's not so obvious how white can defend this one, as knight on b3 covers a lot of squares. And in fact, this might have been black's best chance in the game. Instead, we saw e4, where after knight c5, the knights get traded off. Black is definitely still better here, but white's strong chances are quite significant. After rook to b4, rook c2, king comes in. Pates does a great job defending here. Eventually plays f3, opening up the bishop against this pawn on b7, which is a long-term weakness for black. Now after rook c5, rook to d1, interesting decision from white, offering the rook trade in order to get to the 7th rank, where if black were to take on b2, white will be able to go rook to c7 check, and then win its pawn, and white is doing just fine. So rook to d1, king e7, rook d2. Here black trades, king takes. Now black maybe could have taken this pawn, but once again runs into the same problem after king c1, for example. White will get rook to c7 check. It's not so easy to deal with. The Engine does like black here after rook to b4, check, and bishop d7. Not an easy move to find at all. But the point is that rook takes b7, black can trade rooks, and then gets bishop to b5 at the end, hitting this pawn, and then king d6, king c5. Black can try to go for the a pawn. Not clear whether black can actually win this one or not, but definitely black keeps some drawing chances in that position. Instead, we saw king d6, and now rook to h5, and at this point, white is saving the game, king to c3, and in fact, the players didn't waste a lot of time here, and they end up repeating with rook to b4, rook c4 check, and yeah, at this point, black no longer really has any serious winning chances, and a draw was the rightful result. Moving on to a game between Maria Muzychuk and Anna Zhongyi, both players in contention for second place going into the round, and possibly even first place if Tan Zhongyi did not draw her game. This one starts off as a c3 Sicilian, d4, early knight a3, a6, mate to c4, and black was maybe under a bit of pressure in this opening. After b5, knight a5, interesting move, stopping black from developing the bishop to b7, that allowing white to just trade it off. But black just continues here at bishop d6, c4, takes, knight takes c4. Bishop drops back to c7, castles, and maybe white was a tiny bit better in this opening, but it really doesn't last long. After queen d4, b5, rook to d1, eventually we get this endgame, and yeah, very, very drawish endgame. White has a 2 versus 1 majority on the queen side, but it's really difficult for white to create a strong pass pawn here, as black's pieces are quite active, and black is the very nice d5 square. So bishop d5, bishop c6, and pretty quickly here, actually, all the pieces get traded off. Bishop takes e5, we end up in this rook and bishop against rook and knight endgame, where if anything, it's probably black that is a little bit better here, but not too much to actually play for the win. So here the pawns get liquidated after rook a4, e5, check, king f7, and yeah, neither side can really do much here. More pawns get traded off, takes, rook takes, knight e7. The players go for the rook and pawn endgame. And of course, this one was quickly drawn. So 2 more players knocked out of contention for second with a draw there. Next up, we have Anna Muzychuk against Irina Krush. These 2 weren't in contention for second, but they nevertheless had a very, very fighting game here. Muzychuk playing a kind of Kali-like setup. Irina going for a Grunfeld Slav type of approach here as black. And in this position, it felt like actually white was doing very reasonably out of the opening here. f4, the knight drops back to f6. But here, Muzychuk goes for probably the wrong plan with e4. I think the move c4 was better here, followed by rook ac1. Danger's definitely like white's chances, just playing on the queen side. Instead, we see e4. Here, black can trade a lot of pieces on the e4 square. We end up in this middle game where black is completely fine. She'll have the d5 square as well as the c5 break at any point to equalize the position. So, rook d8, the game saw c4, c5. White took, definitely should have played d5 here, according to the engines, and yeah, it seems like the position is close to equal. Whereas in the game after dc5, knight takes e5, it's definitely black that gets the more comfortable position here, especially after b5, takes h3. Here Irina takes on e5 and forcing white to take back with the pawn, which is definitely a long-term weakness. And yeah, black is the only one that can play for the advantage here in this heavy piece endgame. Just having a slightly safer king, slightly better structure. But ultimately, Muzychuk defends this one very, very well. And despite Krush's best efforts, she was not able to really create any serious winning chances in this one. And eventually this game was drawn as well, as white just kind of holds on, keeps everything defended. And pretty soon here, the players actually did repeat moves. And yeah, the game was agreed drawn. So that takes us to this final game between Anna Muzychuk and Alice Lee, which started off in the Petrov defense. Muzychuk definitely choosing one of the classing continuations here, with c4 undermining the knight on e4. Knight c6, trades on d5, knight c3. And for the most part, black was doing all right here out of this opening. Maybe white is a tiny bit better here. Little bit more space in the center. A bishop d2, b6, black is very, very solid here. After queen g6, we get this endgame, where it should have been equal for black. But Muzychuk definitely starts putting some pressure on Alice here, with d5, bishop to g5, rook to d1, and eventually the knight coming into d4. Now black was still okay here as the game continues. Knight c6, king f8, both sides getting their king in. Takes, couple pieces coming off. And here Alice goes for this decision, knight e5. Definitely wasn't forced, because after king c3 takes, we get this rook endgame where really not as easy for black as it might appear at first glance, as white can put a lot of pressure with this c6 pawn. So rook e6 play, maybe they need it. Rook e2 is better, because now white gives check, comes back, rook to d7. Rook e7, and now c5. Very, very nice move from Muzychuk. If black takes on d7 here, then white will take back. Black has to stop the pawn from promoting. And then white would be able to advance the pawn to c6. And this definitely should be winning king and pawn endgame for white, as this protected passer is just way too strong. Black's king is immobile, and white's king will be able to maneuver around and eventually break through. So c5, black plays king e8, which is the only move. If black were to take this one, then after rook to d8 check, rook e8, white could take this rook on e8, king takes, and now king to c4. White would be winning back this one, and this is likely a very nice king and pawn endgame for white as well, as the king is more active and can come around and pick up the a pawn. So after c5, we see king e8, takes on b6, c takes b6, and now rook to b7, another nice move going after the b pawn. Here black is still holding. Alice was defending this one very, very precisely for some time, but it's not that easy. Rook takes a6, rook takes f2, rook a7. Here black played rook f6. The Andrews did like rook takes g2 more. But not an easy decision to go for. To rook takes f7, for example, or king to b4. This definitely looks very, very dangerous for black. So we see rook f6 in the game. Now check, king to d4, rook takes c6, rook takes f7. Here's where Alice finally goes wrong. She plays rook to c2. She needed to go rook a6 here, keeping the rook on the 6th rank. And most importantly, defending the g6 pawn. Because after rook takes g7, the king goes to d8, starts walking over this way. And although it still looks very, very unpleasant for black, it is 2 extra pawns for white. I believe that black would have much better drawing chances. It might even be a draw with best play. Yeah, basically black would try to have a fortress here, and it's hard for white to push the a pawn, which will one day hang once king e8, king f8 happens. Instead, we saw rook to c2, but now rook takes g7, rook takes a2, and white goes king to e5. Very, very strong, very important move. If white were to take this one on g6, then black can start getting the king and king to d7, and black would be holding the draw. So Muzychuk brings the king in first while black's king is cut off, and now she wants to take this pawn with the king and win with one of her g-pawns. So rook takes g2, rook takes g6, and at this point the king starts to come back, but white is in time king f6 to get the king in, and this one is actually winning rook endgame for white. With best play, which definitely wasn't easy to convert this, but Muzychuk does show the right technique. She gets the king to g7, and now the pawn starts advancing. And eventually, unfortunately for black, she can't stop white from getting the Lucina endgame, where the king and pawn will advance all the way to the end. So Rook A7 here, very nice technique from Muzychuk. King to G7, G6. This point is basically just a textbook win for white. Check, king to G8, Rook H2, G7, Rook G2, Rook check. The rook comes down. Now white is ready to build the bridge and win the game. So Alice tried Rook to G4 here, but this allows Rook H1. White's king gets off of the G file and onto the H file where there are no checks. And this one is all over. King F7, check. And promotion. And that was the end of the game. So with that, Anna Muzychuk wins a huge game in round 9. She actually finishes with 2 straight victories to get clear second place in the event.
Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe.